Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm really excited about today's topic because I think it's something we all struggle with from time to time and could always use a little bit of help with, and that is communication skills.
Yeah, it really is the foundation of everything we do. It's so important in our relationships at work and every aspect of our lives. And I'm Sarah. I'm happy to be here to talk about this with you.
You know, you're right. Communication is essential. It's kind of like a superpower when you think about it. Today we're not trying to turn anyone into some kind of communication guru overnight, but we do want to give some real practical advice on how we can all improve our communication skills, whether it's for everyday conversations, emails, presentations, anything really.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about real-world strategies you can use right away. And, one of the things that came up again and again in the research we did was this idea of active listening.
Oh yeah, active listening. I've definitely been guilty of kind of zoning out during conversations or thinking about what I want to say next instead of really listening to the other person. But it sounds like active listening is so much more than just hearing the words someone is saying.
It really is. It's about being present, being engaged, and making the other person feel like they're being heard and understood. When you feel like someone is truly listening to you, it creates a sense of trust and connection.
Yeah, it's like when you're talking to a close friend and you can tell they're right there with you 100%. No distractions, no judgment, just fully focused on what you're saying.
Exactly, and that can have a huge impact on the entire conversation. When you're actively listening, you're more likely to understand the other person's perspective, ask good questions, and come up with solutions together.
So it's not just about being polite, it's actually a really important skill for collaborating and problem solving.
Absolutely, and it's even more crucial these days with so much communication happening online. When you're not face-to-face, it can be harder to pick up on those subtle nonverbal cues, so you really have to make an extra effort to listen actively and make sure you're understanding each other.
That makes a lot of sense. So active listening, that's like level 1 of communication mastery. What else can we do to improve our skills?
Well, this is where things get really interesting because a lot of times we focus so much on the words we're saying, but what about all the other messages we're sending without even realizing it?
You're talking about body language, right? I've definitely had those moments where I've completely misread someone's body language and it's made things super awkward.
Oh, it happens to the best of us, but the reality is that our nonverbal communication can say just as much as our words. Think about it. You can tell if someone is bored or interested or even upset just by looking at their posture, their eye contact, their facial expressions.
Yeah, it's like when someone says, "I'm fine," but their tone of voice and their crossed arms are telling a completely different story.
Exactly. Our body language can either support our words or contradict them completely. And the interesting thing is that we can actually use this to our advantage.
So are you saying there are secret body language tricks we can use to get people to do what we want, like some kind of Jedi mind control?
Not quite. But we can definitely be more aware of the nonverbal signals we're sending. For example, making eye contact is a great way to show you're engaged. And subtly mirroring someone's posture can help build rapport.
Mirroring, so if someone leans forward, I should lean forward too. Like we're doing some kind of synchronized dance.
Well, think of it more as a subtle reflection, not an exact imitation. The key is to do it naturally and authentically.
Got it. No robot moves allowed. But I do like the idea of being more aware of my own body language. Am I slouching? Am I fidgeting? Are my arms crossed like I'm putting up a wall?
It's all about awareness. If you start paying attention to those nonverbal cues in yourself and in others, you'll be surprised by how much you learned.
This is blowing my mind. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of communication mastery here.
Oh, we've only just begun. Let's shift gear for a minute and talk about another really important piece of communication writing skills. We do so much writing these days: emails, texts, social media posts, reports. It's endless.
It could be overwhelming, but all the experts we looked at agree that good writing is basically good thinking. It makes you organize your ideas clearly so that other people can understand them.
It's all about clarity and precision, whether you're writing a persuasive email or trying to tell a captivating story.
And don't even get me started on the importance of proofreading. I can't tell you how many emails I've sent with embarrassing typos that made me want to hide under my desk.
Oh, we've all been there. But thankfully, we have some amazing tools now to help us catch those mistakes. Grammar checking software can be a lifesaver.
Oh, I love those tools. They're so helpful. But it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's about making sure your message is clear, concise, and gets to the point. Nobody wants to read a giant wall of text.
You're so right. It's like decluttering your writing. Get rid of all the unnecessary words and phrases and let your ideas shine through.
I love that analogy. So clear writing equals clear thinking. But how can we make our writing even more engaging and memorable? That's where storytelling comes in, right?
Absolutely. Stories are powerful. We're hardwired to connect with them. They capture our attention, trigger our emotions, and help us remember information. Think about your favorite TED Talks or presentations. They often use storytelling to make their messages stick.
Oh, totally. I've seen TED Talks that have completely changed my perspective on things. And it's all because the speaker told a compelling story that drew me in.
Stories help us relate to information and make it feel more real. And you don't have to be a professional storyteller to use this technique. We can all find stories from our own lives that can make our messages more persuasive and help us connect with our audience on a human level.
So instead of just listing facts and figures, I could share a personal anecdote or an example to bring my message to life.
Exactly. It's a much more engaging way to communicate. And it brings us to another important idea: authenticity.
Authenticity. It seems like that's a theme that keeps coming up in everything we've talked about so far, from active listening to body language to storytelling.
It's true, because at the end of the day, communication is about connecting with other human beings. And that connection is built on trust and being genuine. When you're authentic, you're showing up as your true self without any masks or filters.
But that to be scary. What if people don't like the real me?
That's a valid fear, but I think it's important to remember that people are drawn to authenticity. When you're genuine, you're more relatable, more likable, and ultimately more effective as a communicator.
So it's not about trying to be someone I'm not. It's about embracing my unique communication style and letting my personality shine through.
Exactly, and it's about understanding your own feelings and being sensitive to the emotions of others. That's what we call emotional intelligence, and it plays a huge role in how we connect with other people.
This is so insightful. I'm starting to see how all these different communication skills are connected. It's not just about mastering individual techniques. It's about cultivating a mindset of authenticity, empathy, and genuine connection.
That's a great way to put it.
This has been amazing. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, though.
We have a lot more to talk about.
Wow. We were just talking about body language before the break, and it's crazy how much we communicate without even saying a word.
I know, it's like this whole other language we're all speaking.
Right. And speaking of communication, one thing that really stood out to me in all the research we did was this emphasis on clarity and being concise, especially when it comes to writing.
Oh, absolutely. We've all read those emails or articles that just go on and on and on, and by the end you're like, wait, what was the point they were trying to make?
Exactly. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So how can we avoid doing that to other people? How can we make our writing clearer?
Well, I think it comes down to structure and simplicity. Think of your writing like a roadmap. You want to make it easy for your reader to follow along and get to their destination without getting lost.
You're right. It's like you're building a bridge for your ideas to cross over.
And don't forget about white space, too. Giving your words room to breathe on the page makes a huge difference in how readable something is.
Okay, good point. Now, I personally love using strong verbs and descriptive language to make my writing more interesting, but I also know it's easy to go overboard and end up sounding pretentious or just confusing. How do you find that balance?
That's a great question, and I think the answer depends on who you're writing for. If you're writing for a specific audience in your field, then using some technical terms might be fine. But if you're writing for a general audience, it's best to stick with clear and simple language that everyone can understand.
Makes sense. Don't use your fancy words unless they really add something to your message.
Right. And don't forget about the power of storytelling. We were talking about that earlier. Storytelling can be just as effective in writing as it is in speaking.
Oh, definitely. A good story can make even the most complicated topic more engaging and memorable.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about listening, we've talked about writing. Now let's move on to what is probably the most feared form of communication: public speaking.
Yeah, public speaking, I think almost everyone gets a little nervous when they have to speak in front of a group.
It's one of the most common fears out there, but it doesn't have to be terrifying. With practice and the right mindset, anyone can become a confident and engaging public speaker.
Okay, so how do we get started? What are some tips for calming those nerves and giving a great presentation?
Well, the first thing is to know your material really well. The more familiar you are with your topic, the more confident you'll feel.
That makes sense. You have to have a solid foundation to stand on.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to practice. You can rehearse in front of a mirror or with friends or family, or even record yourself to see how you come across.
Practice makes perfect, right? Or at least it makes us feel less terrified.
And it's important to remember that it's okay to be nervous. Those nerves can actually give you a little extra energy and help you stay focused.
So it's all about channeling that nervous energy into positive energy.
Right, and don't forget about connecting with your audience. Make eye contact, smile, use your voice to engage them, and make them feel like you're talking to them, not at them.
That's good advice. Okay, now for the part I always dread questions from the audience. I always freeze up when someone asks me a question I don't know the answer to.
A lot of people feel that way, but remember, questions are a good thing. They mean your audience is interested and wants to learn more.
So instead of dreading questions, I should welcome them.
And if you don't know the answer to a question, it's perfectly fine to say, that's a great question. I don't have the answer right now, but I'll be happy to look into it and get back to you.
Phew, that takes the pressure off.
The more you practice public speaking, the more comfortable you'll become. It's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
And who knows, maybe you'll even start to enjoy it. Okay, so we've talked about listening, writing, speaking. What other communication skills do we need in our arsenal?
Well, in today's world, we can't forget about online communication. That's a whole other set of challenges.
Oh yeah, for sure. Email, social media, instant messaging. It seems like we're always communicating online these days. And it can be tricky sometimes. It's so easy to misinterpret someone's tone or intention in a text or an email.
You're right, and without those nonverbal cues we can rely on when we're face-to-face, it's easy for misunderstandings to happen.
So how can we make sure our digital communication is clear, effective, and professional?
I think the most important thing is to be mindful of your tone. It's really easy to come across as abrupt or rude in writing, even when you don't mean to be.
Especially when you're typing quickly and not really thinking about how your words might sound to the other person.
So it's always a good idea to reread your emails or messages before you hit send. Just make sure they convey the tone you intended.
And sometimes adding an emoji can help soften the tone of a message too, like a smiley face.
Emojis can be helpful, but use them carefully and always be aware of who you're communicating with. What's appropriate for a text message to a friend might not be appropriate for a formal email to a client.
Good point. It's all about context, speaking of which. What about social media? It's such a powerful tool for connecting with people, but it can also be a minefield if you're not careful.
It's true. Anything you post online is out there for the world to see. Potential employers, clients, even future romantic partners.
So think before you told.
And be mindful of your privacy settings. Social media can be a great way to connect with people, but it's important to protect your personal information.
One thing I've noticed about online communication is that it can feel very impersonal. It's easy to forget that there's a real person on the other side of the screen.
That's a really important point. We need to make an effort to bring that human element into our online interactions. Use people's names, show genuine interest in what they have to say, and don't be afraid to pick up the phone or have a video call if you need to have a more personal conversation.
Sometimes a real conversation is just better. Okay, so we've covered listening, writing, speaking, and online communication. What else?
Well, there's one more essential aspect of communication that I want to touch on before we wrap up, and that's feedback, both giving and receiving feedback.
Feedback is so important for growth, but it can be hard to give and receive sometimes, especially when it's negative.
It's definitely a delicate balance. We want to be honest and helpful, but we also don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or damage relationships.
So how do we give feedback that's constructive and not hurtful?
I think the key is to approach it with empathy and a genuine desire to help the other person improve. Instead of focusing on what they did wrong, try to frame your feedback in terms of how they can do better next time.
So instead of saying that presentation was boring, I could say something like, I think your presentation would be more engaging if you included more visuals or stories.
Exactly. That's much more helpful. And when you're on the receiving end of feedback, it's important to listen, actively ask clarifying questions if you need to, and try not to get defensive.
I need to work on that last part. I definitely have a tendency to take negative feedback, personally, even when I know the person giving it is just trying to help.
It's a natural reaction, but try to remember that feedback is a gift. Even when it's not packaged in the nicest way, it's an opportunity to learn and grow.
So let's all make a pact to embrace feedback, both giving and receiving, and use it to help each other become better communicators.
I love that.
Well, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into communication skills. It's been a really interesting conversation so far.
It has. We've covered so much ground, from the basics of active listening to the complexities of digital communication.
As we wrap things up, I'm curious, what are some of the key takeaways that our listeners can walk away with? What are the big ideas that can really make a difference in how we communicate?
If I had to sum it all up in one sentence, I'd say communication is about building bridges. It's about connecting with people, understanding their perspective, and creating strong relationships.
I love that. And it really ties everything together, doesn't it? Active listening, clear writing body language. It's all about making those connections.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that communication is a two-way street. It's not just about getting our own point across. It's also about listening to and understanding the other person.
It's like a dance, where both partners have to be in sync and responsive to each other.
That's a great analogy. And like any dance, it takes practice, patience, and a willingness to adapt.
One thing that really stood out to me during this conversation is that there's no one right way to communicate. We all have our own unique styles and strengths.
That's so true, and it's important to embrace that. What works for one person might not work for another. The key is to be self-aware and to understand your own communication style.
So like if I'm more of an introvert and I prefer to communicate inviting, that's okay. I don't have to force myself to be a big extroverted public speaker.
Exactly. You can still be a very effective communicator, even if you're not the most outgoing person in the room. In fact, sometimes the people who listen the most are the best communicators.
That's encouraging to hear. So there's power in every communication style.
And remember, communication is a skill that you can develop and improve over time. It's a lifelong journey.
And it's okay to make mistakes along the way, right?
Absolutely. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and keep trying to get better.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one final piece of advice you would give to our listeners who want to improve their communication skills?
Be present, be mindful, and be authentic. Those three things will take you a long way.
That's great advice. I think we can all benefit from that. So to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of communication skills. We hope you found it helpful. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab for more deep dives into topics that matter. Until next time, keep practicing those communication skills and go out there and connect with the world.